You're listening to the Fitzrock Podcast, interviews where we explore the shifts and transitions of life. Here are your hosts, Keith Rock and Don Fitzsimmons. Welcome back, everybody, to the Fitzrock Podcast. We've been off for a few weeks, and we are excited to gear back up again. Today, we're really happy to have Scott Lowry with us. Scott served in the ministry of the Church of the Nazarene as a pastor mostly for about 50 years, if my math is right. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk to him about the highs and the lows and the wisdom and what he wants to share with us. So Scott, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Scott, it's so awesome to have you. It's like, for us, this is a trip down memory lane because we were in your youth group. And who would think that about 50 years later, we would be doing a podcast with you? That's kind of off the charts.
You know what? There was no such thing as a podcast.
That's why I said, Who would have thought that?
That's right.
Could not have been predicted.
No, it could not. It could not.
So it's cool to be with you. Maybe a question that jumps right out is, what are you passionate about these days?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess just the assurance that family is where they need to be in the faith journey would be the most passionate thing, that the kids, that the grandkids are where they need to be, that they have peace, that they have joy. You know, that's probably as much as anything. You know, Terry and I have been married 49 years now, and we are as in love as well, more so, you know, and have just grown in relationship and in friendship through all these years. So I'd really have to say family more than anything else, to be real honest with you.
What do you do to kind of help ensure that with your kids and grandkids?
Probably texting, calling, that kind of thing. You know, we had three of our oldest grandkids. Now, my oldest grandson's dad is deployed, and so he's staying with family, and he couldn't make it here. But with those three, we just spent, a week, and actually more than that with one of them. And man, we swam and we played Mexican train dominoes. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not. And sat around for hours playing table games, which is something we used to do quite a bit as far as when you guys were in the youth group. You know, we played a lot of table games and things back then. And you get to know a lot about people during a time like that, you know.
Absolutely.
Find out if they're competitive or not.
Yeah.
Which, if I recall,
oh goodness.
If I recall correctly, Mr. Lowry here was quite competitive.
You know, there's no doubt some truth in that.
And I didn't mention the soccer player extraordinaire that you are.
Well, not me. My son became quite a soccer player, was actually an All-American, was offered an invitation by Manchester City to go to England. So now he was of our clan. He was the one. You know, I have great memories of trips and tournaments and those kinds of things. You know.
Yeah.
Wow, I wish I would have wore that shirt. I had one of those shirts.
There you go. Oh, you got a Man City shirt, do you?
I do. I have all these soccer shirts, and I don't really watch soccer, but I like the way they look.
Well, yeah, they're pretty cool. And then here, Messi, you know, with his transfer, man, it's a pretty big deal. It's still rates up there in our attention along the way.
Yeah, well, good deal. Well, Scott, during your 50-some years of ministry, have you ever experienced a crisis of faith or a crisis of your denominational beliefs, I guess? And if so, how did you navigate that?
Well, that's really an interesting question. I To answer quickly and easily, I would say I think any tribe, I think any organized group has their politics, and I have always deplored politics of whatever nature. And so I would say that would be something. But in all honesty, we met in the Church of the Nazarene, and the church has been much better to me than I've deserved through the years. I was a bus kid when they picked me up out of the inner city of St. Louis. And so the church has been, it's given me a place to serve. It's just been incredible. There was a time that I went through as a young pastor that I really struggled, because it seemed like there was one segment of Christianity that an awful lot of our maybe louder people were opposed to. You could you were a fine Christian as long as you didn't embrace certain gifts or things like that, and it seemed like there were people that were angrier about that than they were Satan, and so I went through a real struggle with that, and just really, to make a long story short, my superintendent gave me permission to go to a big conference. Now, D. James Kennedy was there, but it was at the Jim and Tammy rah-rah place, and
PTL, yeah.
Yeah. And so I wasn't a PTL guy at all, and I had no idea what was going on. But it was it was some of Jack Hayford was there, some incredible leaders and speakers. And I basically told the Lord that I would serve wherever he wanted me to. And if there was ever a crisis, that was it. And the interesting thing about that, during the course of various services, at the end of one service, Hayford wrote, I think he wrote the song Majesty, and some pretty neat songs. And so as the cameras went off, he said, now, many of you have been liberated from the limitations of your native language. And if you would like to pray in your spiritual language, feel free. And so I'm saying, well, Lord, if this is it, just show me what you want me to do. And as an interesting thing that happened, as I was walking out, a guy stopped me and he said, "Hey, I know you." And I said, "Oh, really?" I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. And as you know, I had been highly involved in youth. And then even after I pastored, I served as a district youth leader and on some denominational groups and things. And he said, "You spoke," and he went on and on. And I said, "Well," and he had a name tag on. And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I got some gifts, and I had to decide." And I said, "Really? How did this happen?" And he said, "Well, we had people who were healed, and and he named several things, and everything that he named had happened under my ministry within the previous 5 weeks, everything he named. And it was like the Lord said to me, you don't have to have a certain manifestation for me to use you." And that was how I came through that crisis, man. And it was okay. And there was a freedom after that I didn't struggle with those things. And God's been awful good to me. So that's maybe more in depth than you would like, but it's the truth about the struggle.
Besides family, what was some of your happiest or your happiest memory that you'd like to share?
Well, of course, leading people to Christ. I've had opportunities to speak in situations where the Spirit is moved. Our ministry in Tennessee was an extraordinary ministry. Our church grew exponentially. We saw, in fact, one of the associates had the names of over 300 people who had prayed to accept Christ there. And so that was an incredible highlight there. But I will say this, that even at that and baptizing people, and Terry and I have talked, we've never written down all the names, but man, I've dedicated a lot of babies. and you know, I think of that, and I think of how exciting that is, you know, and these have been, you know, really, really exciting aspects of ministry. I've been a part of personally starting 2 churches. The one that we started there in Georgia, our first pastorate, and then another one there in Georgia. And then in working as an assistant to our district superintendent, I was involved in starting about 7 other churches. And probably what's most exciting when I think about this, my son's involved in starting his 2nd church now that he's been a part of starting. And you know, I mentioned that he had been invited to England, and I asked him, I said, "Are you going to go?" And he said, "No." He said, "I think God's got stuff for me to do here." So to see kids come to faith and love Jesus, that's man, that's what it's about. You know, that's what lights my fire.
How would you say your beliefs have evolved over time?
Kinder.
Oh, say more.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how much of that would be age related.
I've known some grumpy old men, so maybe not.
You know, it's interesting you should say that. We used to go to the ministers and maids retreat, and people and guys would sit around and it was awful. I mean, just some of the conversation. And inevitably on the way home, I would say to Terry, I'd say, "Honey, if I ever get that negative, if I ever get that grouchy, would you please just shoot me? You know, just shoot me." And, you know, and it's interesting because, I mean, we've been through some really, really hard times with some horrible decisions on the part of a child while in high school. And we've been through some really real life stuff that, in fact, one night, Don, I was laying in bed and my chest hurt. And I thought, I'm having a heart attack. And I thought, you know what? That's okay. And that's for real. Now, Terry wasn't real happy with me after I told her about that. But, you know, there's joy even in adversity, even in depths of pain. And the joy of our Lord is our strength. And I think if we don't have joy, we're probably pretty puny spiritually, you know. One of the great things the enemy wants to do is steal our joy, by the way.
I was wondering, do you find that like I would think that Don and I would say, like, over time we've become more authentic and just how we are. Do you feel like in any way, like you've like have a different authenticity now than you may have had when your younger days?
Oh, yeah. I think I couldn't put a finger on a point in time. You know, when we started the church in Georgia, I don't remember doing this, but we've got good friends who actually came to the Lord, joined the church and the whole thing, neighbors there, that said, I used to mow the lawn wearing a tie. Now, I don't remember that, and I really don't. They tell me it's true.
That doesn't sound like the Scott I know.
No. But, you know, I don't know if it's how I grew up. I don't know. But it's always been about being real. It has always been about being real. And sometimes that makes you less acceptable to some folks. And I think for people who are real, I think people can sense that, you know. But yeah, in starting out in ministry, there was a real consciousness of you have to do this, you have to be this, you have to. And there comes a point where you just, it's just not worth it. You basically have to go one way or the other. Now, and I don't know if you guys, in fact, I don't even know what the current statistics are, but over 80% of guys, several years ago, I read a study in Christianity Today, over 80% of guys who start in pastoral ministry are out within 10 years. And I think being less than real is a great contributor to that. You know, I really do. You know, I know we shared an experience, Wayne McCamey and group, you know, that was a real critical time, a time for me. You know, the timing of that was very, very critical because it's hard to separate sometimes what is emotional, what is spiritual, what is, and those things overlap, you know. And so that was a very good thing for me, especially in relationship to my family.
Awesome. And I don't want to dig up any dirt on you, but when you said that you're kinder now, as you think back, are there times when you think, oh, I can't believe how on edge I was?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, I had grown up under such legalism and such harsh preaching and teaching. It was just the nature of things, you know, and that was the model, you know, that's what, you know, that's what, you know, I'll tell you a turning point that just occurred to me. I was studying the book of First John, and the Bible says there that if you say you have no sin, the truth is not in you. Now, the word there is hamartia, which means literally missing the bullseye. And so if we say we never miss the bullseye, the truth is not in us. In those early days, I had this conditioning that I had to always act like I'd hit the bullseye, you know, and I didn't. And so there was I preached a series in the church we started there in Georgia, and I had a guy in my church, name was Eduardo Llanes, and he was a student at Emory. He was Cuban, knew the Greek forward, the Hebrew backwards. And I sat down with him and I said, Eduardo, I want you to go with me through this. My Greek, I survived Greek, okay? I survived it. And so we went through that. And when I preached that message, you know, I told people, in fact, I've been quoted, that if you're not sure whether something is a mistake or a sin, confess it as a sin. You've missed the bullseye. And if we confess our hamartia, he is faithful and will forgive us, you know. And so that was a real theological turning point for me because of this misunderstanding of Christian perfection, if you will.
Can you tell us like one time that was the most difficult time in your life? Like a little bit about that.
How yeah.
That was.
Yeah. My daughter had gotten involved with some very bad people doing some very bad things. And the church that I was in, I had already been there longer than any of the previous 5 pastors. And churches get in cycles. And none of the previous 5 had hit their 4th anniversary. I was at year 5. when all this happened. And I went to the board meeting and I gave a devotional on if a man cannot lead his own family. And so I told him, I said, now I have my resignation in my pocket. And I did. I had it typed up, folded up in my pocket. And I said, and if you feel like I need to give it, then I will. And I'm going to leave the board meeting and let you discuss this without me even being around. And if you'll just call me and let me know what you decide. Now, this church had what I call the whiplash board. We had a lot of young people coming in. We had a lot of people coming in. And some of the old people rallied and elected several people who had been in leadership in the past. And it was not a positive board. And so I went home and waited for the phone call. And that was a critical time of just being real. Told them this is what we're going through. And I understand if you need somebody that is better at raising their family. But I did say this, and I feel a little embarrassed now. I said, but if you do have to let me down, if you could do it easy, I'd really appreciate it. This is the hardest 3 weeks of our lives. And so I went home, and sometime later the phone rang, and the board chairman said, Pastor, he said, this is Denny. He's still a friend of mine. And he said, I just need you to know we had 2 motions tonight. And I'll try not to get emotional talking to you about this. But he said, the first motion is this. You've been there for us, and we want to be there for you. And it was unanimous. The second motion, if you need time to take care of your family, you take the time. We'll schedule speakers. We'll make sure the bases are covered. And we want you to be able to take the time that you need. And it happens that this was during the Promise Keepers movement. And there was a Sunday morning that I didn't know where my daughter was. I didn't know not only where she was, but who she was with. And I was so broken that at pastoral prayer time, I had an associate was praying. I just began to my chest heaved, and I just told the Lord, I said, I can't preach. There's just no way that I can get up there and talk. And all of a sudden I felt hands on my shoulders, and I looked back, and there were probably 20 men behind me praying. And I got a fresh wind, and we made it through. We made it through, and came through the whole ordeal closer to our daughter. And in fact, she just called today, and we talked a little while ago. And so, yeah, there were some real crises during that time. I hope that goes along with what you were asking, Keith. I'm not sure.
It does. Yes, absolutely.
So there are going to be plenty of listeners who are currently struggling with a son or a daughter who they're really worried about. What would you want to say to them?
Well, naturally, love them, let you know that you love them. I would say, don't let the situation compromise your integrity. I think a lot of times, in fact, even in crises, I think parents are so afraid the children won't like them, that they will make concessions, and they will go along with things that are so contrary to our foundational Christian faith, that lovingly do not compromise who you are, so that they have someone that they can turn to who doesn't cave under pressure. And that's probably the hardest part of the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, now that you have all this wisdom of all these years, and you told me you earned your gray hair.
I did.
If you could go back and talk to some of the folks you ministered to early on. What message would you have for them?
Oh, I think of the old Winston Churchill quote, never give up, never give up. The old chorus that we used to sing, that the Imperials used to sing, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. I think some of the biggest struggles, I came under attack by a lady that our Sunday school superintendent removed her from teaching because of some of the things she was saying. And he was such a nice guy that she wouldn't believe it was his idea. She was sure I'd put him up to it, and I really hadn't. And so she wrote to the generals and said, well, my pastor, and named me, said that 3 of you have this gift, and is it this? Is it this? And one of them had been her professor. And so they were going after my credentials. And they come to find out, they told her that, if you can authenticate the charges you're making, we will remove his credentials. If not, we feel that he has enough information just in what's been written to pursue a lawsuit. And suddenly she got real quiet,
Yeah.
And he told me, he said, Scott, he said, if somehow in ministry you can develop a tough skin, but keep a tender heart, he said, God can do a lot with you. But it's hard. It's hard to have a tough skin and a tender heart at the same time. And that would be something that I would say, keep your eyes off of people. They're going to disappoint you. They're going to let you down. And, look full in his wonderful face. I guess that's kind of what I would say.
Well, that's good stuff. Appreciate that.
So what I remember, I came to church with another friend. His name was Eric, and
Right.
he introduced me to church there. And something that I'd like to share is because something in that experience was different than many of the experiences I had afterwards, where it became about, it was just different. Like the experience I had as a youth there was like people being really loving and kind. And
There was a spirit there.
Yeah. And the whole figuring out about a spiritual belief was important, but none of that really mattered if people weren't loving and kind. To me, it didn't. And it's like, that was something that I'll never forget. And the importance of that with both you and Terry were incredible, and still, probably touches everybody that was a part of that group. I think for us it has. And besides us getting better looking,
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. Keith, I remember when you came to the Lord. I remember it. It was the most disastrous youth retreat I've ever done in my entire life.
I remember that youth retreat you're talking about. But
oh my goodness. We had people from the neighborhood. That's back when I was convinced that more is always better. Not so in a youth retreat. They were teaching you guys games, truth or dare. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah. And it was a disaster. Nancy Van Rothwell got sick, had to go home early, was throwing up, and just, it was horrible. There was one spigot sticking out of the ground of water. That was it. And we won't go into details about that. However,
and there were scorpions. Don't forget that.
Yes, there were. There were scorpions.
There were scorpions.
And I'll never forget. Keith comes to me and he says something like, "I didn't come here for nothing." And he had not made a profession of faith. And we went out at a rock, and Keith we prayed together out there on a rock. And I don't know if it's Southeast Missouri or what it was, but there was one good thing came out of that retreat, and that was Keith a faith decision.
That was actually, don't downgrade the spigot. That was a very good memory for me anyway. Just being real.
we'd have been in real trouble without it. We were in trouble with it.
It was rustic.
Oh man, it was. And then Don, the times your mom would have us over and we'd pray for your dad, and he's sitting in like the next room, you know.
Nothing awkward about that.
Well, Scott, is there any like parting thoughts you'd like to leave people that are listening today with?
You know, it's so neat to be in touch, actually, you know. You kind of, I don't know, after all these many years and, you know, the ups and downs and the whole thing of life, and realizing that, you know, we're in the home stretch now. And to go back and to talk with you guys, to remember some of those occasions.
One thing before we leave, I don't want to leave out, was like what an incredible job you did in selecting your marriage partner, and like how Terry was like I got to learn how to laugh being around Eric, but then around your wife as well. She was very, she just loved to laugh. So that was a happy memory as well.
Oh my goodness. It's just, she often says about that period of time, you know, she didn't grow up in the youth group. And I don't know if you guys remember the story, but I was with a group from Mid-America in her church. And probably the second time I ever preached in my life, she actually gave her life to the Lord as a senior in high school. And then she came to Mid-America and we got married. And she always said, I was one of the kids in that youth group. She said, I never had a youth group. I never had that experience. And so she said, I always felt funny about people talking about me being a leader. And you've got to realize we were only 22, you know, and I tried like crazy to have a real mustache back then too.
Don't remember that.
No. But you're right. Terry has just been an incredible gift and loves people. God was better to me than I deserved there for sure.
Scott, thanks so much for being with us today. It's been a delight. And we do really appreciate the influence that you've had on our lives and that you've continued to have through the years. So thanks again for being here.
Well, thank you guys for letting me be a part of this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fitz Rock Podcast. The music you are hearing is Swim with Wild Musical Instruments by Your My Muse. Copyright 2019 and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial License. Until next time, have a fantastic life.